Start the recording. We can wait like a minute or two more. Matt, you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
All right. You're the only one I can ask. All right. Let's just get started. We're recording it anyway, so we'll send it out after to everybody. Um, you know, Matt and I have been discussing VAMP for quite a while. I'm sure everybody else here has been as well. It's been all the rage that everyone's talking about, and we thought it would be a good idea if we shared what we have about it. We had a bunch of questions that were submitted as well. So we'll try to get into it, answer everything, um, assuming we have the time. And you could feel free to drop in any other questions you have along the way. So, what is VAMP? I'll start off just giving an intro, and then I'll turn it over to Matt to ask me any questions, and we'll turn this into a full discussion. So VAMP is something that Visa announced about 15 or so months ago. It's a way of how they measure fraud. It's something that is both measured on a merchant level and an acquirer level. They look at fraud from two different ways. They use something called the TC40 report, um, which is call it a high level report, and the TC15 report, which is what most merchants have been used to seeing until now. The TC40 report is something that's been around for a very long time. It, it it's a way of counting fraud as soon as that chargeback comes in, before it even turns. I shouldn't use the term chargeback because it's not officially a chargeback. As soon as the issuer is notified by the cardholder that there's a potentially fraudulent transaction, they submit that onto the TC40 report. On average, about 25% of all fraud alerts that show up on the TC40 report don't end up turning into an actual chargeback. Sometimes the cardholder, after talking over with the issuer or going through certain questions, realize that hey, it's not actually a chargeback. It's not something that I don't recognize. I do recognize, and they ultimately don't turn into an actual chargeback. The C15 report are what actually turns into an actual chargeback, and they do it. The VAMP rules, they have two thresholds. There's on an acquirer level and on a merchant level. On an acquirer level, it's 70 basis points is considered excessive. 40 basis points is the early warning, and then the above standard, which is 50 basis points. The same thing applies on a merchant level. Uh, Once they're in the excessive ratios, they start facing fines, and they're notified on it. They look at an acquirer's entire portfolio, so it's not limited to just one specific merchant, it's on the entire portfolio. On a merchant level, it's obviously specific to one merchant, and that's by mid. So, it can be sometimes easier or harder to do that threshold for it. Uh, it officially went into effect. April 1st was really just a transition period, and everything as of October 1st is when it officially went into effect. We should be finding out relatively soon what everyone's from an acquirer level, what those fines are going to look like. I'm not sure if it comes out this week or some people say it comes out the 15th. So in about a week or so, we should be seeing that, and we'll probably see a lot of merchant accounts getting shut down for it. That there's one other thing that's on the VAMP thing. And that's something called enumeration attacks. They specifically look at it on an authorization level. So when they want to do bin testing and stuff like that, they'll run it through a merchant. There's also you can't have the enumeration attacks. I got to get it's a 300,000 actual enumerated authorization transactions that they count in order to do it. They also it's a similar thing where you face fines around it. Most merchants aren't necessarily aware of that. They're really focusing on the fraud side, which is where most merchants are affected by this, and we're seeing this happen, across the board. Whether you're what's considered a high risk or even not, if you have any sort of fraud, the acquirers are already starting to crack down on this, and probably don't have to tell anyone here because you've all probably seen and have heard all about it. That is VAMP. Now, I'll turn it over to Matt to ask any specific questions. We could talk more about some of the details as well.
Well, let's jump back into the TC40s. Obviously, we've been working with merchants for decades now, decades. And when this first came out, well, actually, what was it, May, when people really started to talk about it a little bit? They were asking, what's a TC40? Because the acquirers typically don't share that with you, or if they do, you don't know what the hell you're looking at. So it's a fraud ratio based on certain metrics that Visa is looking at. And in many cases, it's unfair, because if it comes through as potential fraud and it turns out that it's not fraud, but there's a metric or a flag on that customer for, let's say they had a loss stolen at one point in time, they could count that twice against you. And so there's a whole bunch of things that you have to be aware of. And my understanding, Yitz, is Visa is looking at even lowering those thresholds from 0.8 to 0.5, which is even scarier. Have you heard the same thing?
Well, so they originally did actually. They I think their original ratios were zero point 0.5, and then they quickly got a ton of pushback around that. So they did raise it up to zero point 0.7 again for it. So I haven't heard them necessarily that they're going to be lowering it. I do know that this is very much a work in progress. Like Visa is, the one good thing around this is that there's been so much pushback and so much noise around it that Visa is actually like listening, and we finally have a voice here where, that they're listening to merchants and acquirers for direct feedback around VAMP and how to change it. While I don't think there's going to, from what I've been told, they're not going to make any changes before January 1. I do anticipate that there will be changes made post January 1. That'll probably be for the better. Touching on the TC40, the TC40 report, if you've ever seen any of my posts on LinkedIn, it's really a sledgehammer. It's a very, very, very flawed tool to use to measure fraud. I think Visa has a lot of limitations around it, so they're using it. It absolutely destroys pretty much any merchant, whether you're the highest risk or lowest risk merchant. There's really nothing you could do, because majority of fraud that happens in the card not present e-commerce world is first party or friendly fraud. Um, and those are legitimate transactions where the cardholder is claiming they never authorized it. And those all end up showing up on a TC40 report. So, there's not really a whole lot that merchants can do to stay off of the TC40. We'll talk about what can get you removed from the TC40, but ultimately, there's very limited things specific to the TC40 that you as a merchant can do to stay off it or to
Yeah.
get removed from it.
I also know that there's quite a bit of fear in the marketplace. I've in the various channels that I've been pulled into, WhatsApp groups, multiple WhatsApp groups for large 8 and 9 figure ecom groups, Telegram groups, same type of people, same type of brands and businesses, just high volume e-commerce brands. They're terrified because they're starting to see and hear about shutdowns from certain acquirers, and they're trying to figure out what to do, where to go. Do you actually own your data, and are you able to port it over? Like, there's 1,000 things to consider. I know we're talking about VAMP today, but my first word of warning to anyone that's listening to this is make sure you own your data, and that if something goes wrong with your current merchant processor, that you have the ability to migrate that data over to another one that might look at you more favorably. And your TC40 is not going to change, processor to processor, but I think Yitz and I are going to talk about ways that you can help insulate yourself from a lot of the issues that can arise with the new VAMP rules.
Yeah, 100%. You got to be very, very careful and make sure you're staying on top of it. One thing I tell everyone is do not be reactive to this stuff. You have to be proactive because acquirers, after they start receiving the fines around it, are going to be aggressively shutting down merchant accounts, and there's not going to be much warning around that. As soon as they start feeling the pain of those fines, they're going to start passing that stuff on to the merchants. So you really gotta have a game already, and if you haven't already started, you're a little behind the eight ball because we're 5 weeks in, but you got to stay ahead of this stuff and make sure you're on top of everything.
Yeah. Well, I know when you and I first started talking about this, yes, we were talking about the TC40s and the TC15s and the differences between the two of them. And you seem quite certain that using 3D Secure on your transactions could deflect a large majority of those TC15s. Is that still the case?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, I'm biased around 3DS because it's what we sell, but the way it works, so we talk about the TC40 and the TC15 are the two ways they're measuring it. The TC40, we'll talk about a little bit later on what you can do around that. But for now, really, the focus should be on the TC15 because that's the number one thing that you should be doing to stay off it. Otherwise, an actual chargeback will be counting twice against you, once on the TC40 and then the second time when it shows up on the TC15. What 3DS does is it shifts the liability off the merchant onto the issuer. That means a transaction that actually gets charged back, that was 3DS protected, will not actually turn into a chargeback on the TC15. It's rejected on a network level back to the issuer. So from a 3DS standpoint, it should be something you're absolutely using. There are a couple of different ways to use it. You can use it frictionless, where you're only running through the transactions where you're not getting challenged on. Maybe a year or two ago, I would suggest doing that. I think with where we are now, I would suggest running 3DS on everything and doing a challenge if you need to. If the issuer can't do it by a risk-based authentication in a frictionless way, you do the challenge. But 3DS 100% keeps you off the TC15 report. The other way to get off the TC15 report is on what they call the pre-disputes, the alerts like RDR. You can do it. There are some limitations though around that even. It does work. Again, you have to refund usually the transaction, and it therefore removes it from the TC15 report. There could be an overlap depending on when Visa has a thing that depending on when they pull, their term is when they extract the data. Um, so it might miss that if you don't have enough time to refund it before they extract the data for the TC40, then it will for the TC15, then it'll show up on that TC15 report. So you have to be careful around that. But again, you're generally out with that. You're losing out on the revenue on those transactions by refunding. With 3DS, it's a liability shift. You're keeping your revenue and you're staying off the TC15.
So let's talk about this for a moment. I had a conversation with an acquirer this very morning, and when you look at the universe of consumers out there that could buy your product, not everyone has a sapphire card or a super platinum or black card in their wallet. When you look at the people that are consuming, the buyers, are they on a Cap One card? He said that Cap One cards usually 90% of the time end up as a chargeback. So why wouldn't, if Capital One, you don't want to stop taking it, right? But if you could deflect the liability back to the issuer off of
Yeah.
you, why wouldn't you do it? I mean, it just makes sense.
Yeah, and again, if you're a merchant that's seeing even a decent amount of chargebacks, if you're not doing it, you're ultimately going to end up getting that merchant account shut down. The acquirers are going to start cracking down around that stuff, and they're going to do it. Personally, I do think that eventually what you'll see, and I might be jumping the gun a little bit, I do think that they eventually exclude the 3DS from the TC40 report, simply because regions like Europe, which 3DS is mandatory, and they do it in a way where every single transaction effectively is a challenge transaction. There, almost 100% of the fraud that's happening is first party fraud that's showing up on the TC40 report. So
Yep.
there's nothing else that they could do to actually stop the fraud. So And there's a lot of pressure from EU and some of the other countries where 3DS is mandatory to basically say, hey, listen, we're using the tools that you gave us. You know this stuff is first party fraud. So I do think that that's ultimately where we land, but until that happens, and you have to hear that from Visa, under the assumption it's not.
Well, let's reiterate and emphasize uh, one of the main points of this. So 3D Secure 2.2 is a frictionless method in which a consumer purchases one of your products. It sends the card acquirer, or I'm sorry, the card issuer, the transaction. The card issuer validates that this is the consumer that's purchasing it. It comes back as a token, which we store in our platform. And that secures the transaction from the consumer being able to say, this wasn't mine. Now, could they charge back and say, oh, the product was lost or stolen or damaged? Sure. But for the most part, it will defend you from the consumers that are going to their bank saying, I never bought this, which is usually what they do. Now, that's 3DS 2.2, which is frictionless. The clients that we have that are using it, which are several, many, hundreds, I mean, probably thousands of sites we have using 3D Secure, especially our European clients. We now have 3RI. So if you're running a subscription, you may say, oh, that's great. It's going to protect the first transaction. But what about cycle 2, cycle 3, cycle 4 rebills? Well, we've built this great integration with Pay that allows you to secure every subsequent transaction. So if down the line you got cycle 4, cycle 5, someone's trying to charge back, we still have that tokenized.
Yeah, so 3RI was built specifically. You have to realize a little bit, I guess, of an understanding around 3DS was created specifically because the networks realized that uh, you know, e-commerce is evolving. It's continuing to grow year over year by single digits. At some point, we'll be doing more card not present transactions than card present. And the way we're making payments in that environment is evolving. It's no longer just, desktop or mobile. It's voice activated transactions, Internet of Things, gaming consoles, now AI agents that are making purchases. So there are a lot of different ways that they never really imagined payments would be made in that environment. And the infrastructure that had previously been, powering e-commerce had been the same legacy infrastructure that powers card present. So they created, 3DS as one of the protocols that's built specifically to power what they call the present and future of payments around it. Subscription was the number one thing. Like generally, if you're a subscription merchant, and you're seeing a chargeback on an initial, you're usually seeing it on every um, transaction after that. And what was which really didn't make a lot of sense was if you authenticated the initial transaction with 3DS that you couldn't protect everyone after that. We know that you made the initial, so any subscription thing should be included as well. What they did do, they created 3RI specifically built around that. Again, your subscription chargebacks are still going to count towards your VAMP ratios. So you should absolutely, Visa just started supporting 3RI in April as well. So you should 100% be doing that for both of them as well.
Absolutely. Um, did you have a document that you wanted to show, or are we not going to go through the presentation?
No, no, I didn't have any presentation on there. So the other I'll talk about some of the exclusions that are around it. So there, while I mentioned at the beginning, there's something on an acquirer level and on a merchant level. There is VAMP. I don't think you'll see a lot of merchants on a merchant level being in the VAMP threshold, specifically because there is a minimum required threshold of 1,500 call it VAMP counts. So that's both on the TC40 and TC15, which is a pretty high number for your average merchant to hit. They're usually not getting nearly that type of volume on that. So most of them will not get affected by it. This is not the first iteration of VAMP. There was a prior iteration of VAMP that was specific to 3DS. They had it both on on a VAMP level was on an acquirer level, and then they had what they called VFMP, which was on a merchant level. Most You rarely heard of a merchant getting into the VAMP or VFMP on an acquirer level, though you did hear acquirers do it, and I think the same thing's going to happen here. It's much harder to hit on a merchant level, but on an acquirer level across their portfolio, they'll very quickly be hitting that.
What is the other service that's available through Visa? Something Insights. Um,
So water insights and effectively compelling evidence. So compelling evidence really is the only way that merchants can get off the TC40 report. Um, there are there's a bunch of data points that you have to submit. So it's like email address, device ID, shipping address, like three different things that you have to do it. You also need two prior transactions that are between 120 and 365 days that did not get charged back from the same cardholder. Which means that there's probably a small window of merchants that are going to qualify for this. If you don't have a lot of returning customers that, come back every, 4+ months, you're probably not going to fit the criteria. There are certain industries like gaming industries that probably do see that and they'll fit that, but for the most part, most of them won't do it. Compelling evidence does actually get those chargebacks removed from the TC40. So if you have a transaction that to do it, you can submit it. It's one of two ways. One way is using it pre-dispute and submitting it post chargeback, once chargeback was initiated or submitted, and it's officially counted as pre-dispute. You manually do it. The other way is again is automated through 3DS. 3DS is capturing all that data. So even if you go through a frictionless and you don't want to challenge, or you're doing what's called data only, which waives liability shift, but helps on the approval side, it's capturing all that information as well. So all that stuff is automated. So if they'll see the prior transactions as well, they'll know that it wasn't charged back. They'll know that those weren't charged back, and it'll automatically enroll you in compelling evidence and remove you from the TC40 report.
okay. So as a merchant, rather than so if they're going to get ahead of it, like you'd said, get ahead of the numbers. What are your tips for calculating the ratios for portfolio management?
See, that's a very, very hard thing. Ultimately, right now, it's very limited on how you can get those TC40 reports.
Hmm.
It's usually only on an acquirer level. We are trying to work, with Visa to see if we can simplify this process, but usually you have to go to the acquirer. I think they get it like once a month or something. So it's much harder to, manage on a TC40. The TC15, you can, you get those chargebacks as they come in. So you know that. So you should really be staying on top of that stuff. But again, I think a proactive approach is having 3DS and using the pre-dispute stuff, and doing everything you can on that side of it, really to manage for it. If you're a merchant that sees a lot of first-party fraud, um, this is a very like I don't want to say simple tip because it's not a simple tip, but you know, it's a basic tip. Add some type of human element to the transaction, whether that could be post with like an email or something like that. It's easier for cardholders to charge back something where they don't actually put a person behind it. Once there is some level of human interaction, you do see some drop offs in chargebacks around that.
A couple of years ago, yes. I'm glad you just mentioned the human element. So we built when Visa and MasterCard were going crazy with some of their rules in the higher risk side of things. We built some interesting tools where you could send out an email and I could say, "Hey, Yitz, you just bought my collagen product. This is the shipping address that we have on file. Click here to validate." So what that's doing is then storing a token saying, not only did we capture his card information with 3DS, but he also clicked this box from this IP address confirming that this is the address that he wants this product going to.
Yeah. Listen, it's little things like this which actually make a difference around it. First party fraud it's the largest problem. People don't realize it. When it comes to true fraud, it makes about a quarter of a percent of all transactions. Like the real problem is first party friendly fraud. I've seen statistics where MasterCard said they estimate around 75% of all fraud chargebacks are first party fraud. Visa told us that they think that's even underestimated that number. I've seen numbers north of 90%. So, it's very, very high, those numbers. And really, there's not a lot that you can do around it. 3DS was created. One of those reasons for that was created specifically to put for issuers to eventually start pushing back on the cardholders, because that's the only way friendly fraud stops happening. If the issuers have to start paying for it and they're feeling the pain, then they'll start pushing back on the cardholders, saying like, "Hey, it's what do you mean this wasn't you who made the transaction? We have a device ID, a location, IP address. We've seen you make many purchases with the same merchant. We know this was you who made the transaction." And then if I want to switch it for another reason, chargeback code, that could be something else. But the fraud up until now has been a kiss of death for merchants.
Yeah. Well, I think the card brands have really done this to themselves, and it started back in the 80s and 90s, the 1980s and 1990s. It's probably far beyond most of the people that are attending this webinar, with mail order, telephone order, where they allowed consumers to start charging back. And in the advent of e-com in the early late 90s, early 2000s, people were figuring out, hey, I can buy this product. Once I get it, I can file a chargeback and not have to pay for it. And it's really online theft, right? It's
Yeah,
online shoplifting.
it's exactly what it is. And merchants are really stuck because what's the alternative? Not accept credit cards. You play on the network's rules. You got to follow them. I will tell you, I have a strong differentiator between, my opinion, between Visa and MasterCard. MasterCard's always been ahead of the game on that. The rules that they create and the things that they do are to help adoption and really are much more merchant friendly than Visa. Remember, VAMP is only a Visa thing. Visa tends to be behind the eight ball and they're reactive to a lot of things. So they create some of these programs really to help adoption, and it does the opposite of it. This is, definitely going to cause, I think there's going to be a lot of carnage that we're going to see before they actually make any of the changes. And merchants that shouldn't have had to get shut down are going to ultimately get shut down because of it, because, they really just took a sledgehammer with how they created these rules.
Well, and I think that there's also a mindset within the card brands that tools like this will clean out the merchants that aren't doing things the right way. So, to err on the side of caution, make sure that you have your things set up right. You're selling legitimate products. You're giving the customers realistic delivery times, and you're delivering on your promises. Communication.
Yeah. So I'll tell you an interesting what's it called? Chase. Um, Chase is probably they're obviously the largest issuer, but what we tend to see sometimes. So one of the rules with 3DS was created besides the liability shift was to also see an increase in authorization. What people don't realize is the number one cost to merchants from a fraud perspective is not on chargebacks. Um, I'm not saying that isn't costly. It is costly, but I've seen Ian Vico once shared that to the tune of almost a $500 billion in false declines that merchants see in a card not present environment that they would normally get approved because issuers just don't have a lot of data around it to approve stuff. So one of the things 3DS was created was in order to increase authorizations. And Mastercard does a great job of it. They have I think it's called data integrity. It's basically if you're using 3DS, if it's a 3DS protected transaction, you have to see a minimum of like 85% approval rates around that. You can't have like a blanket do not honor. I mean, the insufficient funds, stuff like that doesn't count towards that percentage. Um, and they're on top of the issuers, and making sure that they're compliant around that stuff. Visa, while technically they are supposed to see an increase in approvals, they don't have a set number that they have to see approval side of it. And issuers like Chase, I mean, they're really the only issuer that does this, will decline 3DS protected transactions for specific MCCs. So certain MCCs where they know see generally higher instances of chargebacks, and it's usually because of they know they're ultimately going to be first party fraud. So they already authenticated the cardholder. They know that it's a legit transaction. They're declining it on the authorization side because they think there's more likelihood that this transaction is going to end up getting charged back. And those are the stuff where Mastercard is working to stop the issuers from that bad behavior. And right now Visa has not cracked down yet on the Chase side of it, but I think at some point they will.
Well, there's a couple of things in my mind that I see happening that will happen is that merchants, brands will get a couple of merchant accounts and they'll offer incentives for consumers to use a MasterCard versus a Visa on a transaction, and they'll have that route to a different merchant account entirely just to isolate those transactions. I see alternate payment methods like um, PayPal becoming more prevalent. It's just opening up opportunities for stable coin wallets to become more of a peer-to-peer payment method within ecom. It's scary when you look at if you own a store and I came in and bought a bunch of stuff from you and I gave you a check and that check bounced, it's not on you, that's on me, right? So I'd get in trouble for it. What does it make any different if I'm charging back and stealing from you?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like a smash and grab.
Yeah, it's very true, and that's why that's why I think we are eventually, and this could take years. When I say eventually, I know everything moves very, very slow, especially on the car brand side of it. So we might not see any changes to VAMP for another year. I mean, I don't expect that. I think here they've been moving much quicker than they usually do, because of it. But I do think that we will start seeing like real changes that eventually things are going to start shifting more in the merchant's favor.
Yeah. Well, I certainly
Um,
hope so.
yeah, one thing I we have not seen yet, and I do think that we might start to see is I have not seen acquirers start pushing um, both their their ISOs and and their agents and as well as the merchants themselves to really come up with any sort of plan, which is very interesting. I find that a lot of their stuff right now is reactive around that when they should be pushing them to mandate like certain tools, whether that ends up being a pre-dispute like an RDR or 3DS. I would think that if acquirers want to stay ahead of it and keep down the fines, they really should be taking a much more proactive approach around this stuff.
I would totally agree with that. Um, yeah, I think you're right. We're living in some weird times as it pertains to ecom, but over the next year or so, I think things will settle down. But what's going to happen between now and the end of the year? We have a horrible time to do this, by the way. We have Black Friday, Cyber Monday coming up, the holidays, right? Hanukkah, Christmas. There's, there's it's a high transaction period.
Yeah, I really thought when they pushed it back from June 1st to October 1st that they would just push it another 3 months to January 1st. And that was the first date I heard they were pushing it to, but they they went ahead with it, and man, this is gonna be an ugly few weeks.
It's gonna be an ugly few weeks. Oh my gosh, I think Visa just Miller lighted themselves.
Yeah, exactly. But you know what? They could do whatever they want because what's the alternative? Like
Yeah,
people not, yeah. So they know they can get away with it, and that's what they do.
you
Um,
pull up their Discover cards. The
yeah,
Diners Club. It's not happening.
right, exactly. Listen, I'm the biggest proponent of MasterCard, so they're really ahead of the game on a lot of this stuff. So if anyone's listening, switch to a MasterCard.
Switch to MasterCard. If you're using Checkout Champ, you should contact your account manager or myself about getting 3D Secure added. And if you want some ideas or concepts on how to give incentives for using a MasterCard versus Visa during the holiday season, give us a call. We can help you with that. I think Yitz and his team, they're brilliant when it comes to transaction processing. Obviously, they want to sell you 3D Secure, but he doesn't care. If you want to just have a conversation about processing and how to protect your business, he'd be happy to talk with you. Yitz and Truly and just the team over there, they're fantastic. They're smart. Um, what else? Is there anything else we're missing?
Thank
Does anyone
you.
have any questions? Does anyone want to throw anything into the Q&A while we're here? Q&A
Anything
is
we
open.
didn't, yeah, Q&A is open so we could see any questions that you guys submit. We did get one question that someone asked me, how do we leverage Visa's payment network for AI-driven transactions? So Visa does have something around that that's built specifically for agents. Um, I could share that if someone wants, but they understand like a lot of these transactions, like we talk about a world like even 3 years ago, I never imagined, I don't think anyone ever imagines what it's going to look like. But like when we talked about like the metaverse is potentially being something where people make purchases, the AI agents where you basically tell, your AI to, go look for a certain thing and then make the purchases. So we are building around that. The networks understand that this world is evolving in the card not present world, so they are going to build the protocols and the softwares for it, and it is an evolving process. So there are different things that they're going to create around that stuff. And AI agents is something for that. Again, it rides the 3DS rails and some others and the network tokens. But there are different things that you ultimately can do. There is an API that Visa offers for that.
We have another question that came in yet. Do we need to do any changes on the configuration and pay?
You do not. As long as you're utilizing 3DS, we have it's all set up. You're auto enrolled in compelling evidence. So if you're using 3DS, Visa's auto enrolling it. The same thing actually works on a Mastercard level as well. Mastercard auto enrolls any merchant using 3DS, and you don't have to worry about anything around that. One interesting tidbit of information. I don't know. I have not gotten confirmation on Visa side, but I do think it does apply this way. On the MasterCard side, if you're using 3RI, so they're actually sending all the data that's needed through from the initial. They take in the initial. They're sending it through in a subsequent transactions. Those 3RI transactions could count towards your 120 to 365 day transactions. So if you have a card holder that came in and signed up a year and a half ago and utilized 3DS, and then they come back and they signed up for a subscription and they've been using it, and then they come back in a year and a half later to make a purchase. Those 3RI transactions, if they didn't get charged back, will be counting towards um, what you needed to be in that threshold. Again, it is a limited number of merchants that this probably qualifies for, a limited number of transactions, but it does actually work.
Fantastic. All right. Any other questions from the group? Did everyone like the content? Everyone raise your hand if you liked what we were talking about today. There we go. Hands are popping up. Love it. Yitz, I don't have any other questions. I think we did a good job of explaining it. I thought we did a great job of explaining how 3D Secure can help protect some of the merchants and some of the things that clients can do to just really protect their business. I like you guys invested a ton of money and time into building your brands and getting traction on your transactions and sales, and just make sure you're protected. I would say we got another one. Can you use 3RI as a dry run without actually blocking transactions?
So I don't know what you mean by blocking. With 3RI, you're not going to block any transactions around it. It's completely 100% frictionless. So you're going through and sending it through for a new authentication. So you basically, on the initial transaction, you got an authentication, and now before you do the rebill, you send it to us. We send back a new set of data that gets sent with the payload for the recurring transaction. You're not always guaranteed to get it. Sometimes, for whatever reason, the issuer, doesn't offer it. You're probably seeing in about 80% of transactions on the rebills right now. It's still a relatively new technology on the issuer side, so it is taking time to adopt it, but it won't actually block any transactions. 3DS in general doesn't block an actual transaction unless you have it set to do that, especially if you're doing a fully like a challenge transaction. and the cardholder doesn't complete the challenge, in those cases, I generally recommend you declining those transactions because there's a much higher likelihood of those turning into a chargeback. But unless you have it set to a specific way, it's not going to block any transactions.
All right. So in my summary for this, and I agree with you, it doesn't block any transactions, just tokenizes the rebills as they're processing through. So make sure you own your cardholder data, and you can migrate if you have an acquirer that may be sensitive to some of these thresholds. Number two, start implementing 3D Secure and 3RI if you're running subscriptions. And number three, make sure that you're keeping an eye on your TC40 and TC15 stats as they're coming through on your reports every month. Your acquirer should be providing those to you.
Yep. 100%. And if they haven't already provided it, I'd reach out and take a proactive approach on that. You need to be on top of that stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. How can they ping you for or ding you for something that they're not even displaying to you?
Exactly.
Yeah, doesn't seem
There's
right.
some acquirers didn't seem to even know how to, never really dealt with the TC40. They ultimately just, for the most part, ignored it. But now it's front and center.
That's right. Okay. Well, Yitz, I thought this was great. Thanks
Yeah,
for inviting
thank
me.
you.
I like
And I
doing
will,
these things.
yeah, let's do it again. And as we get more information and any changes, we'll send out updates to everybody, and we'll also, do more of these if need be.
All right. Everyone have a great Thanksgiving, Black Friday, and Cyber Monday, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Take care.